Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. This episode with Alane Freund is full of so much amazing information, and she talks about not only the research, but differential susceptibility and that anxiety comes from overstimulation. She talks about the number one treatment for anxiety is prevention, and we talk about the optimal level of arousal. She gives at least 15 ways that HSPs can really take care of themselves at the end. And I asked Elaine to take a look at my show notes. I wanted to make sure I got all the numbers correctly. And the feedback that I received from her is she prefers to just refer to people that are not HSPs as the other 80%. And obviously, I'm really chewing on this and wondering if it creates more of a divide if we say HSP versus non-HSP. The part of me that's really into numbers and accuracy says, well, I think that they're thinking that we have more of us are HSP than not, so as the numbers change. So anyways, I'll be mulling this over for quite some time. Elaine talks about how HSPs often can be late bloomers, slow developers. That really fits for me. And we need to be really careful in diagnosing people with anxiety and depression if they're highly sensitive, because to the outside observer, our being thoughtful can be considered as depressed. And I know I've certainly experienced that. A couple of the things that Elaine says during the interview is what's good for the HSP is good for everyone. I can just hear some of you going like, how come I don't experience that in my life? She talks about prevention for anxiety and that we know the truth and we see the truth. I really do think that this is an incredibly rich episode, and I was so grateful that Elaine was able to take the time to be on the podcast with me. I'm going to read you an abbreviated version of her bio. The full bio and all of the links are in the show notes. Alane Freund has helped people focus on solutions through psychotherapy and consultation over 3 decades in the mental health field. An international consultant on high sensitivity, ICHS, working closely with Dr. Elaine Aron, Ms. Freund has developed and implemented programs for highly sensitive people, children, families, and clinicians who serve them. Ms. Freund specializes in family therapy and education with and about highly sensitive people and LGBTQ+ families. A skilled facilitator and therapist, an HSP herself, and the parent of a highly sensitive young adult, she teaches workshops, offers consultation, has a twice-monthly live question and answer webinar, and leads groups and retreats, including the HSP and Horses retreats at Heart and Mind Equine in Northern California with Elaine Aron, PhD. She can be reached for consultation or referrals through her website, alanefreund.com. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can really help me out by sharing it, posting it on social media, telling your friends about it. And if you're open to rating and reviewing, there are instructions in the show notes on how you can do this. And now, on to the show. Hey, Elaine, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here.
I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And we had some technical difficulties, and we're just learning to be flexible and go with the flow today. So let me just ask the question that I ask all of my guests. Do you identify as a highly sensitive person?
I do indeed identify as an HSP.
And when did you find out you were an HSP?
When Elaine Aron told me I was, I'm going to say probably 8 or 9 years ago. We were horse buddies at the ranch where she rode a horse and where some of my horses live. And all the therapists, we're all sort of a certain age, women therapists, and we found each other. And maybe there are 5 or 6 of us that spent time together and supported each other. And I was the youngest in the group. So they sort of treated me like the little sister. And also, I grew up on a ranch in Oklahoma. My mother was a really gifted horse trainer. So I know a lot about training horses. So they would ask me for help when they had problems with their horses or needed some support, and I'd happily help them. And they knew about my equine assisted psychotherapy practice. And one day after Elaine and I had had a particularly involved session of me helping her with her horse, and she had cried a little bit during it. You know how we cry so easily. And I said, "Oh, finally you're crying. Your horse now knows what you're really feeling. She'll be completely cooperative now." And that decided it for her for sure that I was highly sensitive. So she came up to me in the parking lot. I was getting in my truck, getting ready to leave. And she said, "Elaine, you're a highly sensitive person." And I'm like, "Yeah, I've been told I'm too sensitive my whole life. Thank you so much for sharing. Why are you telling me this?" And she said, "Well, have you read the book?" And I said, "No, what book?" She said, "Well, it's called The Highly Sensitive Person." She never told me she wrote it. She just said, "Look it up." So I looked it up and found out that my friend Elaine was not only the author of the book, but literally the author of the term highly sensitive person. And she said, "I think we could do some great work writing curriculum with the horses and the equine assisted work for HSPs because they love animals and nature." And that was sort of the beginning of the rest of my life.
Wow, that's pretty powerful. What do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
Well, I'm fine with the term. I don't have a lot of problems with it. It's a lot better than all the other things that I was called throughout my life. You know, hypersensitive, overly sensitive, too sensitive, get over it, tuck it in, you know, all those things that highly sensitive young people grow up hearing and probably adults still hear. So I like having a term that describes this trait, but I'm really deeply steeped in the science around it now, so I don't have a bias about it.
Mm-hmm. Is there another term that you wish were used or you think it more accurately describes being highly sensitive?
Well, there are two other terms I use. I work a lot with teenagers and also with men, and I find that they struggle more with the term. You know, there's a stigma. So I've been using one, a finely tuned nervous system. So I like to talk about people having a finely tuned nervous system. And the other one is a reactive brain or a highly reactive brain. You know, my brain is decidedly reactive. And it feels sort of, I don't know, more intellectual and less feely. So sometimes I use that.
Interesting. Thank you. So today we're going to be talking about how we as highly sensitive people can really thrive and do well during difficult times. And we were going to talk a little bit about differential susceptibility and how this can really work in the favor of someone who's highly sensitive during difficult times. Is this a good place to start?
Sure. Maybe I'll start a little bit with just the research behind differential susceptibility and this term vantage sensitivity. I'm not going to go into the details of the research. I present about it a lot, but anyone can find any research they want on Elaine Aron's website, hsperson.com. But the concept of it is that what they found first in Rhesus monkeys, actually, the Rhesus macaque, because their brains are most similar to human brains, that the baby monkeys who had more reactive brains, that they did better when they were assigned to skilled mothers. Now, I don't want to put everything on the mother, but in the monkey population, it's the mothers who do the primary parenting. So those babies that were more reactive, if they were assigned to a skilled mother, they grew up to become leaders in their families. And the ones who were in less nurturing, less caring, less structured mothering got more illness, more injury. They just had a harder time in life. And that was sort of the beginning of this concept of differential susceptibility. Now there's been tons and tons of research that shows that any stressor that a highly sensitive child encounters is likely to make them have more problems, more illness, more injury, more mental illness, any negative thing that you can think of that we would worry about children. And these stressors could be marital conflict, poverty, mental illness, shame, anything basically. So what they discovered in the research over and over again is that in a low stress environment, a highly sensitive child was less likely to develop problems than the 80% who are not highly sensitive. Whereas in a high stress environment, a highly sensitive child was significantly more likely to develop the problems, illness, injury, longer lasting respiratory illness, that kind of thing. So it turns out, and the 80% that are not highly sensitive, that don't have the trait, they had almost a flat line. it's shocking to me that stressors have very little impact on outcome for the 80%.
I'm trying to absorb everything that you said and write it down, and my brain is way behind. So can you recap what you said? Because I really want to make sure I love this information, but it's a lot. So can you recap that so that the listeners and your host really gets that?
I would love to recap it because this is the thing that drives my passion in life for highly sensitive people. When we manage stress for highly sensitive children, they are significantly less likely to experience illness, injury, mental illness, early pregnancy, substance abuse. They're much less likely to have problems in their development than the 80%. In a low stress environment with good enough parenting, highly sensitive children fare significantly better than the 80%. And the dark side, in a high stress environment without the kind of care and parenting that is needed, the highly sensitive child is much more likely to experience illness, injury, and other problems of development. The 80% who do not have our trait are barely impacted by stressors. And this was a shocker to the scientists doing the research and to me, frankly.
Yeah, I'm still processing and taking that in. That's pretty significant research.
It is. And the fact that it's been repeated over and over and over again is critical. And I was just speaking to someone this morning about how to get my message out. Why am I doing these webinars that cost a lot of money and don't make any money? And why am I working tirelessly? And why are you, Patricia, to help people with our trait? It's because of this. I even have a little chill as I'm speaking about it. Mm-hmm. With just a few small pieces of information, we can change the lives of highly sensitive people. It doesn't take a lot. And I want to say the adult piece to differential susceptibility. Listen, if like me, you grew up in a stressful environment, well, I have never met a highly sensitive person that didn't have childhood stress. I mean, our culture, at least not in America, in Western culture, we are a youngish immigrant society where our culture values the 80%, the pioneers to go out swinging their swords and conquering and all of that stuff. So our culture just doesn't value yet highly sensitive people the way older cultures do. So most highly sensitive people alive today, the adults, did experience some level of stress and or trauma as children. But the research is very clear that because of differential susceptibility, we benefit more from intervention at any age than the other 80%. So just listening to this podcast, simply that, you will take it in. If you are sitting here listening to this podcast and you have a sister, a brother, a parent, a spouse, an adult child who is not highly sensitive and they listen to some self-help podcast, it would barely impact their lives. But listening to it for you, for highly sensitive people, you take it in, you process it deeply, you think about it, you integrate it into your life. Things like good nutrition, breathing, yoga, exercise, self-help reading, journaling, spiritual practice, all of these things have a much more significant benefit for highly sensitive people than they do for the other 80%. So really, to me, it's all good news.
I love that. So listeners, you're welcome. Can we talk about, this is a little red of a rabbit hole, but I'm so excited to have you here. Can we talk about what a difficult child might look like for someone who's an HSP? If we look at Dr. Aron's research, those kids that had difficult childhoods have higher rates of anxiety and depression. And I just really would love to be able to paint a picture of what that might look like. I know that we know what the overt part might look like, but what are the more subtle ways that might show up?
It's kind of a tricky question for me. There's the one hand that we do develop more slowly, highly sensitive people. The depth of processing of DOES. Maybe since there might be newbies listening, I just want to run that down very quickly. These are the 4 characteristics that help us identify whether someone is highly sensitive or not. D, depth of processing. We think about things a lot. We think about them deeply. oh, easily overstimulated. This is the only really negative aspect of being highly sensitive, that we become easily overaroused, which is a psychological term, or you can think of it as overwhelmed or overstimulated. E of DOES is emotionally responsive, also emotionally reactive, and a lot of empathy, especially for the underdog. Now, parents, that doesn't mean you can expect your highly sensitive child to have empathy for their younger sibling, because younger siblings are almost always overstimulated for highly sensitive kids. So I'm sorry to my younger sisters. S is sensitivity to subtle stimuli. That's that noticing every little thing. Okay, so back to D. I'm sure you all have heard or seen or known a child who was highly sensitive, who was articulate, had a really keen sense of humor, really got along well with the adults in their lives, just was so tuned in and articulate that they were practically a mini adult on the one hand. On the other hand, there are times in those children's lives where it feels like they can barely function. Now, I find that to be both D and O, but mostly depth of processing means that we process things so deeply that it looks slow. You know, transitions are not hard for us if we give us enough time. If you take enough time for a transition, like for me, leaving the house, I really have to get up a lot earlier than the average person to get out of the house on time. So it means that our developmental milestones, many of them happen later. So maybe the highly sensitive child starts speaking right away, but maybe they're not really ready to get themselves dressed or to pay attention and eat their lunch in the middle of a school day in second grade when they're overstimulated. So my aunt calls it a late bloomer. Being a late bloomer or a slow developer can look like depression and anxiety. You know, highly sensitive people are generally much later to find their mate, to settle down, to have a family, to find a career or a job that works for them. They might flounder around a lot, and that might lead to seeming like depression and anxiety. I like to be very, very careful about diagnosing highly sensitive people with these two mental illnesses. When you're thinking deeply and processing slowly and deeply, you might seem to an outside observer to be depressed because you're so thoughtful and maybe so slow to speak. That can seem like a depressed mood. It may very well be. And it's really important to get professional help and professional assessment if you think that you are depressed. And like I said, we are more likely to deal with depression if we had a stressful childhood. At the same time, sometimes I'm just thinking. So that leads us to anxiety. Is that where we should go next, Patricia, do you think?
Yeah, can we talk for 3 hours? Because every time you say something, I just want to ask you 4 more questions, but I'm holding them. So yes,
we can dig into depression a little more if you like.
It's just interesting what you're saying is resonating so much for me, because as a kid, I was verbal and was reading at 3 and was very independent, but I've described myself as a late bloomer, and it just took me much longer to do things and to figure out what I wanted. And, I always knew like I need an hour and a half from the time I get up till the time I have to leave the house, like way before I knew I was an HSP. Like I know I just need much more time to do things. So I'm just having this kind of novel, fun experience of going like, oh, wow. Hearing about the trait in new ways is just really exciting. So I'm also just kind of having a really good time over here. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. I have a new website. I haven't had a website for myself. I have a little website that was thrown up quickly for my equine assisted therapy program, but my own website, alanefriend.com, I had to write it. And, I tried to be really authentic in my writing on it. And my about page, there's this one thing about, falling flat on my face so many times. And what it takes, the resiliency that we have to get up and start walking again and letting the sun shine on our faces, it takes a lot. I think the reason that I can do it is that I had certain things in my childhood that were played into the positive side of differential susceptibility. For example, My only rules as a kid on the ranch were be home by dark and don't go barefoot in the barn. So really, it was an idyllic life for a highly sensitive young child that I was just kind of running wild in the, out on the ranch in the woods and with my pony. And I have to admit that, sometimes they had to cut out the whole under part of it because I was such a wild child. But I really got to get out of the house, spend time with the horses and the cattle and the dog, and return to optimal level of arousal. So I learned to do that. Another great asset that I had was I had amazing mentors throughout my adulthood. And that's one of the things that children need as an adult in their life. I had some as a kid too, but an adult in their life who really gets them and understands them, who's not their parents. So no matter how good the parents are, it's that auntie or that neighbor or even just a family friend who really gets them. And I had some of those people. It made all the difference.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've spent time on the podcast talking about some of the challenges that I had growing up. My mom was a single parent. We've done repair work, and I often don't talk about the strengths that she really was into creativity and cooking and making sure that I took art classes, and we did a lot of creative expression. And I sometimes talk about my development as feeling like Swiss cheese, where parts of me were very solid and very well developed. And then other places I'm like, oh, missed a whole bunch of stuff there. But I think part of what you're saying is that when we have good enough parenting, we do have pieces that are very, very solid pieces of foundation, and being able to go to therapy or get coaching or doing what we need to do. And we do so much better when we're in a supportive environment that it's so much easier. We have an advantage in filling in those gaps.
Right. And every little bit of good stuff that you got and that you continue to get, you make good use of it. That's part of differential susceptibility. We have to always remember that everything we do for ourselves, every great friend and resource and spiritual teaching that we encounter, or that great book, those things, we make use of them. They make us better people. They don't just kind of go in one ear or out the other or skim over the top. We take them in deep.
Yeah. And I think this is probably going to move us into the next part. I think the challenge is that when we have big, intense emotions and we haven't learned how to manage them, that it's so easy to make up a story in our head and to go back to past injustices or things that didn't work out when we don't know what to do with very big feels.
So true. So true. And we live in a world, I'm doing a workshop shortly for therapists, a 2-hour workshop. And I wrote the description many months ago for it. And it was helping the 20% with environmental sensitivity. Because after all, that's what highly sensitive people have, is an environmental sensitivity. That's one word for it. And one of the ways that we're sensitive. So I was listing all the things in our environment that, make me feel overstimulated or wounded in some way. And I listed me too. I listed, we're in an election year. I listed politics. Oh, here's a huge one for me: screens, social media, all of that stuff. It just yanks my chain so much. I listed all these things and I wrote it all. And then what should happen? But we had a pandemic.
Dang, I hate when that happens.
Here's the important thing about all these things that are so overstimulating and so wounding. And, I hear from HSPs all the time now about how they just hurt from their empathy, because the world is hurting. And it doesn't, there was 9/11. That was a long time ago, but it still sort of resonates in my head. And there's global warming and climate change and fracking. You name it. It's not to me about the politics, but about the planet. And I think even in Sensitive, the Untold Story, the documentary about Elaine Aron and our trait, she talks about her passion for whales and, her environmentalism and how painful it was for her, but also how important it is for her to try to create change. So whatever our environment is bringing us, whatever huge things are, and however our feelings are being activated, the interesting and important piece to me is that highly sensitive people will actually fare better. we will do better in all of these environments. We really, really, really think about what's going on around us. We process it so deeply that we know what is needed. It's quite amazing. I mean, we are the canaries. And Elaine says all the time, and I say all the time as well, that what's good for highly sensitive people is good for everybody. What is good for the highly sensitive child is good for all the children. So when you, in your mind, you think, what we really need is to, we need to help young girls feel stronger in themselves. And that is what will help prevent sexual harassment and sexual assault when they're adults. We see what the solution is even before half of the world has noticed the problem. And so we have to see that as a strength. And in the world of, say, this quarantine that went on and on and on and is going on and on and on, we know what 6 feet looks like. Actually, interestingly, I told my client that I was practicing 10 feet of social distancing for the quarantine. And he said this wonderful thing. He said, oh, good. If I say 10 feet, maybe I'll actually get 6 feet.
Exactly.
Elaine was telling me, Elaine Aron on the webinar was telling me how she's going hiking on the trail and the bikers are not going single file and they're going within 2 feet of her. And she yells at them, single file. They're oblivious, but she knows. Mm-hmm. We know. So no matter what is happening and what is so painful, we have to hold in our minds that we do have emotional leadership. All those strong and hard feelings that we might be having, they're to guide us and they're to guide our species to what we need to do to survive and thrive. Now, here's the piece that I think is hard. All those feelings are overstimulating. We have to have those strong feelings to discharge all the stuff that we're processing. It actually serves a purpose. But I don't know about you, but I find strong feelings very overstimulating. One thing that really helps me is to avoid the news, but I'm a high sensation seeker and I can't help tuning in now and then, but then I have to discharge it. So overstimulation, back to diagnosis and mental illnesses and all of that stuff, overstimulation looks like anxiety. And I have noticed in myself and in many HSPs that it can be a habit. It can become a habit to sort of live in that elevated arousal. And by that, I'm not talking about sex, though we could talk about that at another time. I'm talking about, the increased heart rate, increased temperature, slightly increased muscle tension, the beginnings of anxiety. And anxiety is on a continuum, right? So you start with just a little stress, and then it can move up and up and up. And if you could see my hand, you would see it going. And at the very heightened, most horrible part of it is a panic attack, over which one has zero control. So somewhere on that anxiety continuum is the place that we go when we have stress. Just kind of our brain goes there and it becomes a habit. So what can we do to prevent the climb up that scale? And I think that's the number one treatment for anxiety or overstimulation is prevention.
Can you say more about that?
I'll talk about some specific tools. But one of the things I like to say to highly sensitive people, and I say this to everyone who's listening to this and to myself, you know what it is for you. You're HSP. I say to my teens, my highly sensitive teens that I work with, you know the truth, you see the truth. Now act on the truth and speak it. So you know what works for you. And I'll tell you, here's some things I know work for me. If I meditate twice a day for at least 10, but preferably 20 minutes, I'm a much better person. If I exercise to the point of sweating every single day, regardless of how I do it, I feel so much better. If I drink water, especially if I take a sip every 15 to 20 minutes, I drink a little water, it de-stresses me. If I close my eyes, do you know that eyes are where 80% of stimulation comes in? So if we close our eyes, even for 30 seconds, it helps us lower our level of arousal and return to optimal level of arousal. I didn't really identify or define that. We know from the research that it's not great to be under aroused. That's boredom and understimulation, and that can actually have a damaging effect on a child. I'm sure everybody read those studies back in the day that under arousal really caused problems in child development, but it's also not healthy. And some HSPs are so isolated that they become under aroused and they need to go out and do things, save the world. But overarousal is what I mentioned before, when you have too much. And I cannot tell you what optimal level of arousal is for you, because for every person it's different. Just like there's as many different ways to be highly sensitive as there are highly sensitive people. And we're pushing up 1.6 billion highly sensitive people now with increased population. So that's a lot of different ways to be highly sensitive. And however you are is right. I only say yes to half of the items on the self-test that is backed by research that Elaine Aron and all those researchers that she and her husband guide and work with, only half. But I'll tell you what, being an introverted high sensation seeker sure feels like more than half. And here's what I did, and I recommend this to everybody. If you're not sure, or maybe you have someone in your family who you're pretty sure is highly sensitive, but they took the test and they just didn't resonate with it, they didn't have that many yeses, tell them to take the child test. Or if their parent is still around, to ask their parent to take the child test about the adult. So when I took the Is Your Child Highly Sensitive test, and I thought about myself, all the stories I've heard and all the experiences that I had as a young child, I was yes on all but one. So there you have it. And that's how temperament works. Man, I'm digressing. I hope that's okay.
We're all good.
We're born with temperaments. And, most of the research has sort of settled on 9, but many different models talk about 4 or 5 or 6. But there are 9 temperaments, and you're born with them. They are, moving toward or moving away, active or less active. And one of them is sensitive to the environment or less sensitive. Anyway, there's 9 of them. And everybody has a different configuration. It's not really yes, you have it, or no, you don't have it. It's you're a lot this way or a lot that way or moderate. Well, as we grow, if you have good enough parenting, we learn to work with our temperament. So I am an extremely withdrawing person. I often say, and some people don't believe me, but I think it would be true, that I could live in a hut in the Rocky Mountains for the rest of my life. And maybe if I didn't have a child, I don't think I could live without him, but I would really be okay not having contact with other humans for the next 20 years. That's how introverted I am. But here I am talking to you, and I talk to people all the time. And because I've learned to work with my temperament. And, at the same time, I have other temperaments. And one of them is that I'm really active, and I have a lot of thoughts and a lot of desire to help people. So I've learned to work with my withdrawing nature and to find a way to prepare by laying with my eyes closed and lowering my arousal level, then to have the conversation, and then to go out and take a walk or ride my bike or ride my horse, do something to return. Okay, so we learn to work with temperament. It's when we don't successfully learn to work with our temperament that we get into trouble. And that might also be those times when we can't work with our overarousal. Now, full disclosure, I've gotten into a severe habit of being overaroused. I think, I'm a workaholic for whatever reason. That's part of it. But I just wrote a blog a couple months ago called The Hard Things. And this is a quote, forgive me, it's so profound. I'm joking. But I say this to people all the time. When it's hard, it's hard. And I've been in Al-Anon 12-step program for 32 years, I believe, this month actually. And, I have a lot of tools. I love the 12-step programs. That's how I survived being a highly sensitive person. I spent my whole adult life basically in Al-Anon. Oh, maybe it's 33 years. Oops. The tools for living were really helpful to me. But when you're feeling overstimulated, or when I am, maybe I'll keep the focus on myself since we're speaking of 12 steps. When I'm feeling overstimulated, overaroused, anxious, I can't remember the things that help. mean, have you ever gotten there where you're just spinning and you just can't do it? Because when it's hard, it's hard. So the trick is to take care of yourself enough that you don't get into those places. And I'm kind of knocking myself on the head here. Elaine, stop. Take a breath. So, Patricia, I want to just ask you, could you just tell us a couple of your favorite things that you do to keep from getting there into that overaroused state?
I'm really good at getting into the overaroused state and really good about being in the underaroused state. It's the optimal state that I struggle with. I know my routine and my structure is really, really important for me. And especially while we're recording this, we're in about week 3 of the pandemic, shelter in place in California, at least. Sticking to my routine has been one of the things that's given me the most amount of comfort. Time in nature, time with my dog. I have some people that I connect with, taking time to do yoga when I'm able to do that. I've gotten out of the habit of meditating. I feel like, especially right now, it makes me incredibly squirrely if I try and meditate. Having time to read. I have a favorite blanket. I mean, those are the things that give me comfort and peace. How about you?
Well, I like fiction. It's really important for me to have fiction. And I always have a recorded book on my phone or in my car. I still have a CD player in my car. At least I don't still have a cassette player.
An 8-track.
Yeah, an 8-track.
Google it if you're too young to know what that is.
I was raised on 8-track, Fiddler on the Roof, Hello Dolly, Painted Wagon. So
I just watched the movie Fiddler on the Roof the other night, so I'm right there with you.
Oh yeah, baby. So I love the recorded book because it really helps me get lost. And I like to have a series actually. And I think it's so important for me to have a reader that takes me in. So I'm just going to recommend right here. Some of my favorite readers are the Inspector Gamesh series from Canada. I believe that's Louise Penny. I love the Harry Potter series. They're very well read. I listened to them years ago, and I might listen to them again if we remain on quarantine. And I love the Outlander series, another great reader. So I always choose my recorded books by the reader.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Yes.
I listened to Outlander on audiobooks and I loved it. And then when I saw it on, when it came out on video or whatever you say, it was too overstimulating for me. The noises, the sounds, like I'd created this whole environment listening to the whole series and then watching it. I couldn't, it was way too much.
Yes, I can tell you're not a high sensation seeker. Is that true?
I actually am.
Oh, you are.
But it's more with people and connection.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem is, I love James Bond. And my birthday's in November, and often they would put out a James Bond movie on my birthday, and I always went. But what's happened to, television and movies is our culture says that if it's not violent enough and loud enough, then it won't sell. And I think, that's what they've done to Outlander. And it helps me that I've read the books. I do watch it, but it's, it is hard. It absolutely is hard. This season, they're starting the Revolutionary War, and there's a war scene every episode. And I have actually re-listened to the last 3 books ever since they started having it on TV, so I could just remind myself of my images of it,
Even without the violent scenes or anything, just the visual with the noise. And I was just so surprised because I love the series. And it was just a very interesting awareness. But anyways, go ahead. We digress.
It leads us to this idea for HSPs that we do need to read. We have such active inner life that we can make so much more of a book than, the shows can. And so while there is, I hear people are binging on Netflix and doing this, that, and the other thing with the screens, I think it's really important that we read. For me, it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to run down my quick tools. I talked about meditation. It's hard. It's annoying. It's not optional for HSPs. I often say, and I'll say here, that if you have ever had religion that wasn't traumatic for you, now is the time, now that you're an adult HSP, is the time to revisit it, to find that spiritual teacher or religious mentor that will work for you. And, I myself am not in the religion that I was raised with, but I have found spiritual leaders and teachers that are meaningful to me. And I especially love Pema Chodron, for example. And Linda Graham, who she wrote a book called Bouncing Back on Resiliency. And I'm on her newsletter, and her blogs and her videos are phenomenal. So finding those people, it's very, very important to me. I really don't think HSPs should try to live without therapy. Now, I am a therapist. I fully admit I'm biased. And I think there are ways that you can get those needs met, but we do have to reframe our childhood. And, meeting Elaine and reading the kid books, especially The Highly Sensitive Child and Ted Zeff's Strong Sensitive Boy, those books, I read them about my child, but they changed my life because they showed me that I wasn't a freak, that the things about me that didn't fit, that were wrong, were actually strengths. They protected me.
Mm-hmm.
So self-help, really digging into that stuff helps me if I'm doing it regularly. Oh, it's so important that we write. Oh my gosh, we have to write, journal. And, I would love it if every HSP would write their experiences of the pandemic. I think that would be an amazing book, actually. If we really wrote what our experiences were, and I would like to invite everybody to send me your chapters. But writing both gets it outside, but sharing it also helps our community. And there's nothing like helping others. There's this thing, parenting. It's unbelievable how healthy I will be on behalf of my child. Now, why can't I do that for myself? Parents really have something to teach us. And I think what I have to do, and what we all need to do, is to parent our own brain. So this leads me to, Elaine Aron's been teaching about this a lot in our workshops, this idea of looking at the big picture. If you were standing on Mars and looking down at your life right now, what would really matter to you? In the big picture of things, what is the true fear? And one of the ways I work with this is, what is the opposite? So, one of the things I've been saying a lot lately is life is turned upside down. Okay. Well, if my life is turned upside down by the events in our world right now, what is right side up? My college child is home, and I get to spend all this time with him. It's a gift I wasn't going to have. What else? The planet is healing because there's so many fewer emissions and pollution. What else if life is upside down? What else is right side up? I don't have to leave my house. Oops. Did I say that out loud? But really, I can do my work. I'm still doing all my good work, and I can do it from the comfort of my own home. And although life is upside down right now, I actually can still see clients in person at my barn with my horses because we stay 10 feet apart easily. There's just, even my office clients. Okay, I hope they're not listening to this because, for a few years I closed my office completely, Patricia, and I only saw clients at the barn in nature. And then I realized, some days it's wet and some days it's hot, and I'm in my 50s and maybe I don't really want to always be in the dirt and the weather. And so I started having an office again a couple years ago, and I just do one day in the office. But guess what? Right now, my office clients have to come out to the barn. We still do chair therapy, but we're doing it in nature.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's right side up. Okay. A few things I've learned through my studies of meditation. One is the importance of breath. And there are a lot of different breathing techniques out there. And the couple that I've been really using and teaching of late are the bellows breath, which is a 1-minute exercise. And if you look it up online, you'll find it. And the other one is alternate nostril breathing, or pranayama, and it's from yoga. And I also have been doing 10-minute yoga. I'm no yogini. In fact, I really don't care for yoga. But without a doubt, I do better if I do 10 minutes of yoga. And I really like Yoga with Adrienne on YouTube. It's free. She's funny and down to earth. And so it's very accessible. And I will just 100% put out there. She has a 10-minute video on alternate nostril breathing and a 10-minute video on sun salutation, which is just sort of the beginning of yoga. One of these days, I'm going to write a blog about how to learn to do it.
And if you go to the show notes at unapologeticallysensitive.com and click on this episode, I'm taking copious notes, and we'll have links to all of this in the show notes.
Also, I think that you all might enjoy reading my hard stuff, the Hard Things blog, on my Alane Freund website. Okay, so here's another antidote, 2 more antidotes to anxiety. One is a hard style plank. Now, a hard style plank, I learned this from my trainer, Adam Hirsch. He's amazing. And it's where, probably most of us have tried a plank at one time or another. In the last decade, it's become very popular. But when I did a plank, and it was hard, like I do it on my elbows and maybe from my knees even, and you try to keep your back pretty horizontal to the ground. And it's hard, undoubtedly. But what's really hard is when you are tensing as hard as you can, your arms, your core, your bottom, your thighs, your everything in your body, you're tensing it as hard as you can for 5 or 10 seconds. That can really interrupt anxiety. It's really hard to have anxiety when you're doing push-ups or plank in that way. The other antidote to anxiety that I'm a big fan of is loving kindness meditation, otherwise known as metta. Probably most people listening to this have heard of it because it's a very popularized part of the meditation world right now. And it's that thing where you say, may you be safe and protected from harm. May you be happy and peaceful. May you be healthy and strong. May you be at ease. That's just a very simple version. And the way it works is that you think of people that you're doing this meditation or blessing or prayer for. And it is amazing how if you are putting that out there in the world, and so, I say for people for whom meditation is not really part of your life or your vernacular, that prayer works as well. When you're really praying or meditating for others, it does extremely help anxiety. But the hardest part of a loving kindness or metta meditation is for me, it's not for the people that I struggle with or people for whom I don't have good feelings. People say that's really hard. No, I think for highly sensitive people, the very hardest loving kindness meditation is for oneself. May I be safe and protected from harm. So I really encourage people to explore this idea of loving kindness for others, because we're really good because of empathy. I know you can do that very easily. Get really good at it and then pop in the I. It is life-changing to do that. Now, I want to promote one more thing, if I may. Sometimes when I'm spinning or anxious, even if I can remember, usually I can't remember to do any of these things, but even if I can remember that loving kindness is the antidote to anxiety, and I learned that from a meditation teacher when I was having anxiety, even when I remember, sometimes I can't do it because I'm just too overstimulated by my feelings. So a woman who is a musician and a teacher at Spirit Rock Meditation Center near my home in Whitaker, California, her name is Eve Decker, and she wrote a song to a loving kindness chant. And it is beautiful. And if you've been to one of my retreats, I play it all the time, and certain people who teach with me don't particularly love the song. I love the song. It's worth a try. You can look it up on Google. I think you can even buy it on CD Baby for probably $1.99. But the song is called May We, as in, may we be safe and protected from harm. And the artist is Eve Decker. It's a beautiful, probably 10 or 11-minute song. And I put it on loop on my phone. And I just listen to it over and over again. And it does sink in eventually. And then there comes a time when I can actually sing the chant with it.
I love that. Why do you think it's so difficult for HSPs to really focus on loving ourselves? And we're so great at being compassionate and generous and caring with other people, yet we often really struggle with allowing ourselves that generosity.
I have a bias about codependency because I've spent all these years in program, and I definitely come from a long line of alcoholism. But it seems to me that we get confused about the line between empathy and codependency. And to me, the line is this: empathy and loving detachment and care for others is all good. But we focus so much on it because it's easier than focusing on ourselves. It feels like we have control over it. We can really, it's so easy to make a difference out there in the world. And sometimes we become so focused on that we forget ourselves. And you're allowed to have empathy and care and go out and help others. But you're not allowed to do it to the detriment of yourself. It's just basic self-care. So I think it's just so much easier to focus on others and our empathy that we let ourselves go. And we can't do that anymore. We absolutely have to take care of that vessel that is our bodies, our hearts, and our minds. And, it's so important. It's absolutely critical that highly sensitive people take care of themselves, because you're the emotional leaders. You're the ones who are noticing and feeling so deeply and can guide the rest of the world to a better place, but not if you're spending your whole life in overstimulation. So if your empathy is so strong that you're really always focused on others, let me reframe that for you. You will do a better job of saving the world if you first put on your own oxygen mask and you first save yourself and care for yourself. There's nothing more important. Well, there is one more thing more important. We have to protect the sensitive children. They have to be allowed to grow up without being shamed for their sensitivity. And we have to change our culture so that we honor those tender little sensitive souls, so that they are the ones who are on the left of the line with many fewer problems, even than the 80%, because their childhood is so structured and so cared for and so nurtured and zero shaming. Then they can grow up and have such easier lives, and they will change the world. Just like we're pounding along at it, doing our best. The children who are now being allowed to grow up with their sensitivity honored because of all the work we HSPs are doing out there, they are really going to be able to fly.
Yeah, I love that. Elaine, I'm looking at time and we're going to need to start shifting gears a little bit. Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we just do a few wrap-up questions?
Well, let's see. I think that the one other piece that we didn't talk about, and we don't have time now, but maybe another time, is my curriculum that I've written on speaking volumes. And it's based on Elaine Aron's book, Ranking and Linking. It's about ranking and linking. It's called The Undervalued Self. And it's a good segue from what I was just speaking of, which is that we do have to speak up for ourselves. And sometimes we're so soft, we expect the world to hear us because we hear the softness. But I really want to encourage highly sensitive people to find your voice and to speak up and to take the leadership, because without you in leadership, we're pretty much lost. And I know you can do it. I'd love to support you in any way I can.
Yeah, I know that I was just talking with a client this morning, and this client was talking about ways that they've been incredibly creative during our shelter in place to really create some great activities for the people that they love. And they were kind of lamenting, like, how come nobody's doing it for me? So we talked about what this client would love to have in ways that they could put reminders around the house for their partner. Please tell your partner that you love them. We talked about doing those little tear off strips that you usually see when things are for sale. And, to write down what it is that you would like your partner to say, that to do it in a fun and playful way, that it's, our fantasy is that people would know what we want. They would do it. We wouldn't have to ask. And part of self-care is learning to advocate for ourselves when we're needing to feel loved or cared for, especially in these hard times. So we did some creative brainstorming about ways that this client might be able to get some of their needs met, but needing to articulate that to their partner.
I mean, it's not fair to expect them to know what you want if you haven't told them. I love that intervention. I think one of the things I like to do is have both people, or even if there are old enough children in the household, to write down, say, 5 things that you would like. And, everybody puts it on the fridge or wherever your bulletin board is. You don't get to have blaming or disappointment if they don't have them, but you put them out. And it's sort of like when you say, I'm sorry to somebody for something, and and you'd like them to say, I'm sorry back for all the horrible things they've done to you. That's not clean, right?
Yeah.
But I totally agree. We do have to ask for what we need.
Yeah. And these things that this client came up with were so creative. And I said, like, I wouldn't have come up with that. And that's not my love language. So if you and I were in a relationship, I'd sadly be disappointing you because that's just not how my brain works. So it's not that the people in our lives don't care. We just are wired very differently, and people do want to meet our needs. Sometimes we just need to give them a little bit of guidance.
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Elaine, what are some of your superpowers being a highly sensitive person?
Well, let's see. I can pretty much tell what anyone needs at any time. And I know how to make an environment better for people. My empathy is really strong, and so is my noticing of subtle stimuli. So I really don't think I'm psychic. I think I use my powers of observation very, very well. And so I really know how to help people. That kind of goes back to that previous conversation. I'm a uniquely highly sensitive person in that I am a go-getter. I like to get things done. I'm a straight shooter, and I'm very direct. And so in the world of HSPs, I feel like I stand out a little bit, sometimes not for the best, but sometimes for good. And I'm also going to say that I have a gift with animals, and I know how to speak that language. So while it might hamper me sometimes in my adult relationships, I experience tremendous joy, and I'm really well connected in those worlds.
I love that. If you were going to share something that somebody said to you at some point that felt hurtful, what would that be? And it can be a composite.
If I were going to say something to the person who said something hurtful to me?
Yeah, but let's start with what they said to you and then what you would want to say back to them now that you've got more information.
Well, I have a perfect experience. I was told my whole life by my highly sensitive father that I'm just too sensitive. He said that to me maybe like 5 years ago when I was 50 years old. And I said, Dad, you're just noticing?
To which he responded,
it just shut him right up, poor thing. But I think to me, I want to wear my sensitivity. And I think, Patricia, you and I both use this language that it's a superpower. I want to wear it like my cape.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm tired of being ashamed of it.
Mm-hmm.
No more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No more. Come out.
Yeah, I tell a story, and I'll just give the abbreviated version that my husband offered to repaint a room in the house. And he'd already done one that I was using, and I decided I wanted to get it painted professionally. And he said, "You're so picky," and I'm like, "Yep." And had I not done my work, I guarantee you that for the next 5 years, anytime something came up, I'm sure I would have said, like, "That's because I'm so picky. It's probably because I'm so picky," because that would have gotten under my skin. And it's like my word is discriminating, and those little details either give me peace or create tension for me. But it's like, yep, that was the end of the discussion.
In my 20s, I had a friend who said to her partner, "Love me, love my dog." And she had a big, nasty dog. And, so I like to say, love me, love my sensitivity.
Yep. Yep. I just, I know that Dr. Aron says that we're not better than anybody else. And that's certainly not the position that I'm taking. But I think we've heard for so many years what's wrong with us. And we often have internalized those messages. And I'm going through some of this right now. Like, I'm that person because details are important to me. And I probably am a thorn in people's side, sometimes for good. And sometimes maybe it's just the part of me that gets really hung up. And I think that when we can take those perceived weaknesses and turn them into what our strengths are and really lead with those strengths, we're the change makers. We're the healers. We're the leaders in the world. We're the emotional glue. And so to really embrace what our strengths are is really what my passion and message is about, so that we really love who we are and that we lead with our strengths.
Yeah. And I think when people say, recently an editor suggested that we take the subtitle of my next workshop is Celebrate Your Hidden Advantage. And the editor came back and said, that sounds like you think that highly sensitive people are better than everyone else, like you're alluding to there, that there are those people out there saying that. And I always say, anyone who says that is clearly not highly sensitive. Because if you're highly sensitive, you grew up being told what a piece of work you are and how you need to change.
Right.
We know. We're just trying to help the HSPs of the world feel good enough, to really honor that who they are is not wrong, because it's very, very few people who were honored for their sensitivity. Now, if you grew up in China or Thailand, the sensitive kids are honored there.
Right.
They are more popular than the kids who are not highly sensitive. But in the Western world, in the immigrant culture that we live in, we were not honored. And we have to learn to honor ourselves now.
Right. And we're in a minority. The dominant culture has a plethora of ideologies about why we need to be outgoing and productive and extroverted in a non-HS way, that I think that it's so important that we really do talk about our strengths on an ongoing basis, because it's just a fraction of the ongoing messaging that we get that's very powerful and very subtle. And so, singing our strengths from the rooftops, I think, is warranted.
Absolutely. And I feel that for pretty much all minority groups need to honor and sing their strengths. I'm part of many minority groups myself, even though it doesn't look like it when you see my picture. And it's so important that we support and honor each other.
Absolutely. Elaine, tell us about any projects that you're working on and where people can find you.
So I mentioned a couple times, I have a couple websites. AlaneFreund.com is my main website for therapy and consultation and speaking. My newer project, just in the past few months, and started at the end of 2019, actually, is Are You Highly Sensitive? I just changed the name. Are You Highly Sensitive Live? Because everything I do on that program is live. So unedited, for better or for worse. You get the real me and the real guests when I have guests. So it's a webinar, usually a minimum of 2 webinars a month, and it's a membership subscription. I spent a lot of money setting it up because I, as a highly sensitive therapist, truly, if I want to do good work, I only see 10 people a week. But Patricia, I want to help more people. I'm really awed and amazed by your podcast and how much you're doing for our trait in our world. And I want to be on that bandwagon. I really do want to help more people. And so what I'm doing is twice a month, I'm getting on Zoom, and all of my members can come. They can submit questions ahead of time or live, and we discuss them. And if I don't know the answer, I go and do the research and I find the answer and I put it in the show notes when I send out the recording. So the way you find me there is areyouhighlysensitive.com, and you join the membership. And I want to offer unapologetically sensitive listeners a discount so you can get your first month for half off. And let's say the invite will be, the discount code to do that will be offer UA for unapologetically sensitive. Offer UA. You've just put it in all caps.
UA or US, because it's unapologetically sensitive.
Sorry, US.
Okay.
I'm a little tired and overstimulated from this really long, amazing conversation. See, even the good stuff can be overstimulating. So offer US, and I will go in and make sure that discount code is there, and you're welcome to email me if for any reason it doesn't work. So it's inexpensive, and I'm just trying to help people. And I just don't think there's a lot of live help out there. So, I'm not being a therapist on that. I'm really coaching. I'm also writing the Highly Sensitive Teen right now, and hopefully it will be out in early 2021.
Is that it?
That's enough.
Okay.
Come find me on Facebook.
Okay. And I have links for everything that will be in the show note. If you've missed anything, just either go to unapologeticallysensitive.com and click on the episode, or some podcasts do have the show notes listed with the episode. Is there anything else before we go, Elaine?
I just want to say thank you for all the work you do. And thank you to all the highly sensitive people for just showing up and knowing you have your trait and believing it's real, because it's just so important for all of us to have community. So thank you for being part of mine.
Thank you for being here today, today, Elaine. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Hey again. So I'm wondering what you thought about that. This is an episode I've listened to twice, and I'm probably going to listen to it a few more times because there's so much great information in it. Wondering what you thought about it. If you are in the closed Facebook group called Unapologetically Sensitive, there are a few questions to answer to be accepted into the group. Elaine is in this group, and I think what I'm going to do, if I remember, is ask her to talk a little bit more about why she refers to the other 80% instead of non-HSPs. I really didn't talk to her about this because it came up after we did the interview, but I'm hoping she has the time to share. She's very, very busy. If you find that you're struggling with relationships right now, we are heading into week 7 of shelter in place in California with COVID. Every week I'm noticing different themes and patterns. We just can't not be impacted by this. And if you're needing support, please feel free to reach out to me, to reach out to somebody else. With the HSP online courses, I've had some people let me know that they're interested. Because everything is so topsy-turvy right now, what I'm doing is collecting names. And when we have enough people that can agree on a day and time for the HSP course, I really want to run them. I think especially right now, we're needing that sense of connection, of consistency, of a safe place where we can show up and be seen and heard. I know the people that I communicate with regularly have been my lifeline. And I have been having that sense of feeling like I'm too much and I'm too needy and feeling like I'm bringing people down. And even this morning, I was communicating with a friend who's in Canada and was able to tell her and be vulnerable. And she's like, no, I just love how real you are. So it doesn't matter who we are or how much work we've done. Sometimes our gremlins still get to us. And when we have safe places to talk about what's going on and people that can hear us and mirror back to us, give us reality checks, man, can it be really healing. I hope wherever you are in the world that you are safe, that you are feeling some sense of comfort and security. If you're having emotions and you're up and down and all over the place, please know it is so normal right now. We're in the midst of this COVID-19 global pandemic. If you're listening in the future and you're wondering, what am I referring to? This is unprecedented, and I just want to send some hope, some normalization, some validation that this is tough. We're managing. We will get through it. And it is just a really different time for us. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.